The cards fell in perfect silence across the crystal table, each one landing with a soft whisper that resonated through the observation dome. Counselor Thane watched the human's hands move and felt the first flutter of wrongness in his neural cavity. The tournament had been Thane's idea. 5 cycles of planning, endless committees, risk assessments filed in triplicate with the galactic concordance. A simple concept: bring the known species together for games of probability and strategy. Show the newer races that competition could exist without conflict. The humans had arrived 3 rotations ago, young and eager, their diplomatic corps full of wide smiles and enthusiastic handshakes. Thane had approved them himself. Error. Fatal error. The human called himself Marcus Webb. He sat now at the central table, surrounded by some of the finest strategic minds in 6 sectors. To his left, Counselor Vren of the Meditation Collective, whose people could hold 14 probability streams in their minds simultaneously. To his right, Ambassador Quill, a singing stone whose crystalline structure processed information in quantum states. Across from him, 3 other species, each one a master of logic, mathematics, and strategic perfection. Marcus Webb smiled at them all, his small white teeth showing, and Thane felt his respiratory slits contract. The human pushed a stack of platinum markers forward. His mouth moved, forming the sounds of galactic common with that peculiar, flat accent his species carried. "I raise," he said. 10,000? The words registered correctly in Thane's translator implant. The meaning was clear, but beneath the surface of communication where truth resonated in the quantum foam of space-time itself, there was nothing. A void, an absence where certainty should exist. Vren's eye clusters retracted slightly. The Meditation Collective member held his cards, mandibles clicking in a pattern that indicated stress. Thane knew what Vren was experiencing because he felt it too. When any other species made a claim, stated a fact, or declared an intention, it carried with it the weight of biological truth. The evolved trait was universal, as fundamental to communication as sound or light. Deception was impossible. Reality itself rejected falsehood. Until now. Vren folded his cards and pushed them toward the automated dealer. "I withdraw from this hand," he said, the translation coming through strained. What he actually communicated, in the harmonic language of his people, was more complex. I sense nothing where something should be, and it frightens me beyond my capacity to process. Marcus Webb's smile widened. He gathered the markers into his growing pile. It was the 4th hand he had won in the last 6 rounds. "That was well played," Ambassador Quill offered, her crystalline voice chiming. The singing stone's compliment carried undertones of confusion. "How did you do that?" was the subharmonic question. "What are you?" "Just lucky," Marcus Webb replied. The void pulsed. Thane gripped the edge of the observation rail, his secondary hearts beginning to race. Just lucky. The words meant one thing, but beneath them, in that space where truth should resonate, there was only emptiness, not absence of truth, not even contradiction. Something worse, something that made Thane's ancient hindbrain, the part that had kept his species alive through the predator-filled swamps of their homeworld, scream danger. The dealer, a neutral synthetic intelligence, distributed the next hand. Thane watched Marcus Webb pick up his cards. The human's face shifted through several expressions in rapid sequence: surprise, disappointment, resignation. Then a subtle hardening around his eyes, a barely perceptible straightening of his shoulders. "I'll open," Marcus Webb said. 5,000. The void expanded. Thane's claws dug into the rail hard enough to leave marks. The human had just performed an impossibility. The face had said one thing, the bet had said another, and beneath both, that terrible absence of truth, as if reality itself had developed a blind spot. Quill's facets flickered. "I will match your wager." Vren had returned to the table after the mandatory rest period, but his posture suggested he was already regretting it. I also match." The others followed. The pot grew. Marcus Webb watched them all with eyes that held something Thane had no word for in his language. Later, much later, he would learn the human term, calculation. The next card fell. A perfect probability flow, clean and mathematical. Ambassador Quill's structure brightened, a sign of confidence. She pushed forward a larger stack of markers. "I raise 20,000. Vren's mandibles clacked once, sharply. He folded. The others folded. Marcus Webb looked at his cards, then at Quill, then back at his cards. His face showed concern, hesitation. The void sang with absence. "I call," he said, and matched the bet. The final card landed. Quill revealed her hand immediately. 4 cards of the same suit, a statistically powerful combination. Her crystalline structure rang with triumph, a clear tone that resonated truth. "I have won." Marcus Webb's face fell for a moment. Then he laid down his cards, one by one. 5 cards, not of the same suit, not even in numerical sequence, a statistically weak hand. But he spoke. "Full pyramid with the ascending run." Thane's vision grayed at the edges. The human had just stated something completely false. The cards on the table contradicted his words, but Marcus Webb said it with the same casual certainty he had used for everything else. And in that void, that terrible void where truth should be, there was no rejection from reality, no correction. The universe simply allowed it. The dealer, programmed with the rules of 10,000 games across 100 species, paused. Its processors cycled through probability trees. The human's words did not match the human's cards. Error, logic, failure, cannot compute. Ambassador Quill's facets went dark. "Your cards do not show this combination," she said. Her tone carried harmonics of distress. "You have stated an untruth," was the subharmonic scream. "How can you do this? How does reality permit it?" Marcus Webb looked down at his cards as if seeing them for the first time. His eyebrows rose. "Oh," he said. "Oh, damn. You're right. I misread my hand." He pushed the pot toward Quill. "Your win, Ambassador." The human's face showed embarrassment. His voice carried apologetic tones. And beneath it all, that void pulsed with something that made Thane want to flee the observation deck, flee the station, flee to the far side of the galaxy where the darkness between stars might be less terrible than what he had just witnessed. Because in that moment of revelation, Thane understood. The human had not misread his hand. The human had known exactly what cards he held. The human had spoken words that contradicted reality itself, and reality had simply allowed it. The game continued. Thane watched, unable to look away, as Marcus Webb won some hands and lost others, but the pattern became clearer with each round. When the human won, that void was quiet, still, almost peaceful. When the human lost, the void writhed and pulsed with that absence of truth that made Thane's sanity feel thin and fragile as ice over deep water. Vren withdrew from the tournament entirely after 2 more hands. The Meditation Collective member approached Thane's observation post, his eye clusters dilated to their maximum aperture. "Counselor," he said, and his voice carried 15 layers of distress harmonics. "That creature is doing something impossible?" "I know," Thane replied. "When I try to read the probability of his actions, there is nothing. Not uncertainty, not randomness. Nothing, as if he exists in a space where truth and falsehood have no meaning." "I know." Vren's primary manipulators trembled. "How can a species evolve like that? The universe itself should reject them. Reality has laws. Communication requires truth. Strategy requires predictable responses to predictable stimuli. That thing down there is breaking the fundamental principles of consciousness." Thane watched Marcus Webb laugh at something Ambassador Quill had said. The sound was warm, friendly. The void pulsed like a predator's heartbeat. "I need to file an emergency report," Vren continued. "The concordance must be informed. That species is a threat, not militarily. Something worse. They threaten the foundation of how we understand reality itself. File your report, Thane said quietly. I will file mine. But he did not move. He could not, because down below, Marcus Webb had just received a new hand of cards, and the human's face had lit up with genuine pleasure. The void had gone still, which meant the human had good cards, which meant his previous tells, his previous expressions of disappointment and frustration, had been false. The human had been showing emotions that did not match his internal state. He had been generating falsehood not just with words, but with his entire physical form. The implications crashed through Thane's consciousness like a kinetic strike. If the human could make his face lie, what else could lie? His posture, his tone, his apparent intentions. Where did the falsehood end and truth begin? How could you negotiate with such a being? How could you trust them? How could you predict them? The game progressed. Other players began to withdraw, not because they were losing markers, but because the wrongness had spread beyond Thane and Vren. The tournament observers, representatives from a dozen species, began filing quiet reports to their respective governments. The atmosphere in the observation dome shifted from festive to tense to something approaching existential dread. And Marcus Webb seemed oblivious. He played his cards, made his bets, won and lost with equal grace. Once he caught Thane's eye and offered a small wave, a gesture of acknowledgement. The smile was friendly. The void smiled back. By the end of the session, only Ambassador Quill remained at the table with the human. The Singing Stone had always been the most curious of her species, the most willing to encounter strangeness. But even she had developed a hairline fracture across her left facet, a stress marker that would take cycles to heal. "This has been educational," she said to Marcus Webb, her chimes carrying undertones of shell shock. "I have seen something that should not exist," was the meaning beneath the words. "Same here," Marcus Webb replied. "You're all incredible players, way better than the games back home." His tone was genuine, admiring. The void suggested otherwise. Or did it? Thane could no longer tell. The human stood, stretched, his vertebrae making small popping sounds that several observers found disturbing. "See you all tomorrow?" he asked. The question hung in the air. Would they continue? Should they? The tournament had 3 more days scheduled. 3 more days of watching this creature warp reality with every word, every gesture, every carefully crafted expression. "Yes," Ambassador Quill said, because what else could she say? Because the alternative was admitting that they had encountered something beyond their ability to process, and the concordance did not admit such things lightly. Marcus Webb left the tournament floor, passing through the crystalline doors to the residential section. The moment he was gone, the atmosphere in the observation dome shifted. Beings who had been silent began speaking in urgent tones. Emergency communication channels opened. Thane's implant buzzed with incoming priority messages. He answered the first one. Counselor Vren's image appeared, fragmented and stuttering. "I have been researching the human species," the Meditation Collective member said without preamble. "Their central database, the one they call the Internet. Thane, they have entire categories of communication designated as false. They call them stories, fiction, lies. They create falsehoods deliberately for entertainment and education. They teach their young how to generate untruths before they teach them mathematics." Thane's respiratory slits sealed completely for a moment. "That's impossible." "I have the data. I can send it to you. They have had this ability for their entire evolutionary history. It is not an accident. It is not a mutation. It is a deliberate, cultivated, essential part of their consciousness. Thane, they think in lies. They dream in falsehoods. Their entire civilization is built on a foundation of flexible reality." The observation dome felt too small, too confined. Thane needed space, needed to think. We should cancel the tournament. On what grounds? They have broken no laws. The human is playing within the established rules. His only crime is being himself. His very existence is a crime against reality. Vren's image flickered. Yes, which is precisely why we cannot simply send him away. The Concordance needs to understand this species. If we do not, if we simply pretend they do not exist, what happens when more of them arrive? What happens when they begin to integrate into our society? How do you conduct diplomacy with beings who can say one thing and mean another? How do you form alliances with creatures who can make promises they have no intention to keep? Thane knew Vren was right, but the knowledge sat in his consciousness like a tumor, wrong and painful. What do you recommend? Observation, documentation, study, and prayer to whatever forces govern the universe that the humans choose to be benevolent, because if they decide to be malicious, we would not see it coming until it was too late. The call ended. Thane accessed his own research databases, pulling up the files the human delegation had provided during their initial contact. Standard materials, history, culture, technological capabilities. But now, reading with new understanding, Thane saw references everywhere. Fiction, theater, poetry, advertising, politics, entire industries built around the generation and consumption of deliberate falsehoods. One file caught his attention, a human concept called poker, a game of incomplete information and deception, where the ability to lie convincingly was considered a fundamental skill. The humans had brought their champion to a tournament of pure strategy, and everyone had assumed he would play by the same rules as everyone else. Fatal error. Thane drafted his report to the Concordance over the next several hours. Every word felt inadequate. How did you explain in truth speech that you had encountered beings for whom truth was optional? How did you convey the existential threat of a species that could edit reality with their words and gestures? He did his best. He attached Vren's research. He flagged it as Priority Omega, a classification reserved for extinction-level threats. Then, he returned to the observation dome for the second day of the tournament. Marcus Webb arrived exactly on time, carrying a beverage container that released steam into the recycled air. The human took his seat, exchanged pleasantries with Ambassador Quill, and the two other beings brave enough to continue playing, and accepted his cards with a smile. The game began again, and this time Thane watched not just with horror, but with a scientist's detachment. He began to chart the patterns. When Marcus Webb's face showed confidence, he usually had weak cards. When his face showed disappointment, he usually had strong cards. But not always. Sometimes the pattern reversed. Sometimes there was no pattern at all. The only consistency was inconsistency. Thane realized he was watching a predator at work, not a physical predator. Something more subtle and terrifying. A predator that hunted in the space between reality and perception, that fed on the certainty of others. Halfway through the session, Marcus Webb won a particularly large pot against a crystalline harmonist who had been absolutely certain of victory. The harmonist's chimes had carried the unmistakable resonance of truth. I have calculated the probabilities, and I will win. But Marcus Webb had smiled, had met the bet, and had revealed a hand that defied the harmonist's calculations. The harmonist left the table shaking, literally vibrating at a frequency that indicated deep psychological trauma. Thane felt a presence beside him. Ambassador Quill had stepped away from the table during a break. Her facets were dim, but her tone was thoughtful. I have been analyzing the human's behavior, she said. As have we all. I do not think he is malicious. I think he genuinely enjoys the game. He laughs when he loses, congratulates others when they win. His pleasure seems authentic. How can you know what is authentic with that creature? Thane asked. Everything he shows us could be false. True, Quill acknowledged. But I have been thinking about what it means to be human. They live in a universe where truth is optional, where reality can be shaped by words and beliefs. For us, such a universe would be chaos, madness. But for them, it is simply normal. They have adapted to swim in waters that would drown us. Thane considered this. You are suggesting we are the disabled ones, that our inability to lie is the handicap. I am suggesting that we have encountered something truly alien, not just in form, but in consciousness, and perhaps that is what the Concordance needs most. Not another species that thinks like us, but one that thinks in ways we cannot even fully comprehend. Below, Marcus Webb had returned to the table. He picked up his new cards, and his face showed nothing at all for a long moment. Then he smiled, and the void pulsed with that familiar absence. I fold, he said cheerfully, tossing his cards away. Ambassador Quill returned to the table. Thane watched her go, considering her words. Perhaps she was right. Perhaps the humans were not a threat, but an opportunity, a chance to evolve beyond the limitations of truth-locked communication, or perhaps that was exactly what a species of predators would want them to think. The tournament continued for 3 more days. Marcus Webb won overall, his pile of markers significantly larger than anyone else's. He accepted the trophy, a crystalline structure that would have made his species' first contact with the Concordance official, and celebrated. He gave a speech that was humble, gracious, and absolutely saturated with that terrible void. Thane's report reached the Concordance Council on the 5th day. The response came back within hours, faster than any decision Thane had ever seen from the bureaucratic entity. The humans were to be granted full membership status. Trade agreements were to be negotiated, cultural exchanges were to be arranged, and a new department was to be created within the Concordance Security Division, the Office of Human Affairs. Its purpose, to study, analyze, and attempt to predict the behavior of the only species in known space capable of lies. Thane was offered the directorship. He accepted, because the alternative was allowing someone else to confront the void, and he could not inflict that on another being. On the last day before the human delegation departed, Marcus Webb approached Thane personally. The human extended his hand in that curious gesture his species used for greeting. "Thank you for hosting the tournament," he said. "It was an incredible experience." Thane looked at the offered hand, at the smile, at the void that pulsed beneath every word and gesture. He took the hand and felt the human's warm grip. "Tell me something true," Thane said quietly. "Please, just one thing that is absolutely, verifiably true." Marcus Webb's smile faded. For a moment, just a moment, the void stilled. The human's eyes, so strange with their single pupils, met Thane's gaze directly. "I am very far from home," Marcus Webb said, "and I miss it." The words resonated with truth, pure, clean, absolute truth. The first true thing Thane had heard from the human in 5 days. Then Marcus Webb smiled again, and the void returned. "But hey, the galaxy's pretty amazing too. I'm looking forward to seeing more of it." Truth or lie? Thane could not tell, would never be able to tell. The human delegation departed that evening. Thane watched their ship accelerate into the darkness, carrying with it creatures that could reshape reality with their words, beings that existed in a state of quantum superposition between truth and falsehood. Humanity had arrived in the galaxy, and the galaxy would never be certain of anything again. Thane returned to his office and began drafting new protocols. How to negotiate with beings who could lie, how to verify information from sources that could deceive, how to maintain sanity when confronted with the void. The work would take years, decades, perhaps centuries. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, the humans were spreading, carrying with them their terrible gift of fiction. The galaxy had asked for diversity, for new perspectives, for fresh thinking. It had received all that, and more, along with a lesson in being careful what you wish for, because now every truth would forever carry the shadow of potential falsehood, Every certainty would be haunted by doubt. Every communication would require the question that had never before been necessary in galactic society. Are they lying? And the only certain answer was, maybe. The void had come to the galaxy, and it wore a human smile.
Claim your seat at the apex.